We use Wi-Fi for absolutely everything, right? Banking, sending private messages, the whole deal. But have you ever, really stopped to think about what's actually stopping someone from just snatching all that info right out of the air? It's this invisible battle that's been going on for decades. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the story of the shields that guard our digital lives. So, just for a little context, this is part 8 of a 10-part series we're doing. All this info comes from a really detailed report on Wi-Fi and Bluetooth standards put together by the folks at RFI Detectives, who are part of Virtualization Options LLC. It's a massive report, but we're zeroing in on what I think is the most important part, the security that's supposed to keep all of us safe online. Okay, so we all have a Wi-Fi password, right? Mostly. Let's be honest, it's to stop the neighbors from binge-watching Netflix on our dime. But that's thinking small. What about a real attacker? Someone parked in a car down the street, just listening, sniffing every single packet of data flying out of your house. Does your password really stop them? That's the big question we're diving into. All right, so here's the game plan. First, we'll talk about the basic problem with wireless security. Then, we'll look at the first attempt, WEP, and spoiler alert, how it failed spectacularly. We'll move on to WPA and WPA2, the long-reigning champs, and then get to today's standard, WPA3. And finally, we'll see why one little setting on your router is a huge deal. So the whole challenge really boils down to physics. Think about it. A wired network with an Ethernet cable is like a private conversation. The data's contained. But Wi-Fi? That's like broadcasting your secrets on a megaphone in the middle of a park. Anyone with earshot can listen in. An attacker doesn't need to break down your door. They just need to be close enough to overhear you. So, facing this huge vulnerability, what was the first big idea? We've got to go back to the very beginning, to the first attempt to solve this problem. It was a protocol that promised to be the ultimate shield, but ended up as one of the biggest what not to do stories in the history of cybersecurity. It was called WEP. That stands for Wired Equivalent Privacy. And honestly, the name tells you everything you need to know about its goal. The idea was so simple and so important. Let's make wireless just as safe as plugging in a cable. That's it. A nice, simple promise. But, well, to quote the report this is all based on, it failed catastrophically. And we're not talking about a little bug here or a minor flaw. No, this was a complete, fundamental breakdown in design. It was like building a bank vault out of cardboard. Just a total mess of engineering mistakes that made it, well, worse than useless. So where did it all go so wrong? Well, there were a few things. First, imagine giving every single person who uses your network the exact same key. Not great. But the real nail in the coffin was something called IV reuse. Now, an initialization vector, or IV, is supposed to be a random number that kicks off the encryption for each chunk of data, keeping it unique. The problem was, WEP's IV was tiny. So on any busy network, it started repeating itself, constantly. For a hacker, this was a jackpot. Seeing those repeated patterns was like finding a secret decoder ring. It gave them everything they needed to figure out the main password. And I'm not kidding, they could do it in just a few minutes. Okay, so with WEP being a complete and total disaster, the industry basically went into panic mode. This wasn't a problem they could put on the back burner. They needed a fix, and they needed it yesterday. So let's look at the scramble to put out the fire, which led to the next generation of security. The first fix out the gate was WPA, which stands for Wi-Fi Protected Access. And you should really think of it as a stopgap, like an emergency bandage. See, it had to run on all the old hardware that was already out there, so it couldn't be a total rewrite. It actually kept WEP's old weak encryption but wrapped it in a brand new protocol called TKIP. And TKIP was pretty clever. It basically just patched up the most glaring holes. It made sure the keys didn't repeat and added some integrity checks. Look, it wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a desperately needed patch that bought everyone some breathing room. But you can't live with a bandage forever, right? The real fix, the permanent solution, came just a year later with WPA2. And this was a whole different animal. It wasn't a patch, it was a complete overhaul. WPA2 ripped out that old busted encryption and replaced it with something called AES, the Advanced Encryption Standard. Now this is the real deal. AES is the gold standard. We're talking military-grade, bank-grade encryption used for top-secret information. For more than a decade, WPA2 with AES was the undisputed king of Wi-Fi security. But even this mighty fortress had a tiny but crucial vulnerability. The encryption itself, rock solid. The problem was how you got in the door. Every time your phone or laptop connects to a WPA2 network, there's this little 4-step process called the 4-way handshake to prove you know the password. Here's the catch. An attacker can just sit there and record that digital handshake. They don't even need to be on your network. Then they take that recording back to their own powerful computer and just start hammering away at it, testing billions of passwords a second. If you have a simple password, well, it's just a matter of time before they find a match. And that vulnerability, that one little crack in the armor, is what brings us to the modern era. Let's talk about the current standard, WPA3. This one was built from the ground up specifically to slam the door on those old problems that even WPA2 couldn't quite shake. This image really tells the whole story, doesn't it? You start with WEP, which was basically a shield made of glass. It just shattered. Then came WPA, the duct tape and superglue fix. WPA2 was a huge step up, a really strong steel shield, but it had that one weak spot in the handle, the handshake. And that leads us to WPA3, which was engineered from the start to be a modern, impenetrable fortress. So what's the secret sauce in WPA3? Well, it's a brilliant new handshake method called simultaneous authentication of equals, or SAE for short. Now get this, with SAE, your actual password is never sent over the air. Instead, your device and the router do this kind of cryptographic dance, proving to each other that they both know the secret password without ever revealing it. This completely kills that offline brute force attack we were just talking about. It's a game changer. And on top of that, you get something called forward secrecy. That means even if a super hacker from the future somehow cracks your password, they can't go back and decrypt any of the old traffic they might have recorded. Your past conversations stay safe. It's awesome. Okay, so we've just taken a trip through more than 20 years of this crazy digital cat and mouse game. So what's the bottom line? What does all this history mean for you on your own home network right now? Let's bring it all home. I mean, when you look at it laid out like this, the evolution is just crystal clear. We went from totally broken encryption to the gold standard AES. We went from a simple static key to a vulnerable handshake, and now to the super secure SAE exchange. The takeaway here is simple. Anything before WPA2 is just asking for trouble, and WPA3 is absolutely the standard you want to be using today. And this all boils down to one final really important question for you. If your router is from the last, say, 3 or 4 years, there's a very, very good chance it supports WPA3. But here's the kicker. It might not be turned on by default. So the most important thing you can take away from all this is to go do something about it. Log into your router's admin page, find that wireless security setting, and check. Is that modern fortress actually active, or are you leaving the drawbridge down?